So if you're like me, you're probably counting down the days until E3 2019, where we'll be seeing a lot more from Cyberpunk 2077. And you probably love CD Projekt RED, the guys that are actually developing this game. And also, they developed a little game series called The Witcher, of course. They brought us The Witcher 3, which was an absolutely amazing experience. And a lot of us are hopeful they'll just do that again with Cyberpunk 2077. Now, we have a brand new interview today with CD Projekt RED, who goes into details about concerns related to Cyberpunk 2077, relating to difficulties transitioning over from The Witcher 3 to Cyberpunk. Also, the working conditions over at CD Projekt RED are a big concern, and they're highlighting this based on the most recent articles from Kotaku related to Bioware, Rockstar, and so on, who have also been accused of major work crunch conditions related to developing these AAA titles. So we're going to dive into this right now. So check out the article for yourself if you're wanting to. You can find that in the description below. But it goes on to say this: as Cyberpunk 2077 development intensifies, CD Projekt RED pledges to be more humane to its workers. Now, this next statement comes from one of the founders at CD Projekt RED. So it goes on to say the following. It says, "We're known, let me be humble for a moment here, we are known for treating gamers with respect." And then it says, "This is what we've been working hard toward, and I actually would like for us to also be known for treating developers with respect." Now, when I first initially got into this interview and this article, I was thinking to myself initially, I'm like, it seems like perhaps they're trying to get ahead of a bad news story, and there's actually confirmation that that might be true here later in this article by Kotaku. So let's get into this a little bit further. So it goes on to say this: one of the ways the company plans to do that, Iwinski said, is through non-obligatory crunch policy that isn't brand new, but that the Warsaw-based CD Projekt RED plans to push harder. He wants to make it clear to Cyberpunk 2077's developers that when the studio asks them to work on nights and weekends, it's not mandatory. So that's indicating that they are working very hard over there, and that the crunch is actually a very real thing within CD Projekt RED. Now, furthermore, it goes on to say this: we've been working toward it for some time already. We've been communicating clearly to people that, of course, there are certain moments where we need to work harder. Like, I think the E3 demo is a pretty good example, but we want to be more humane and treat people with respect. If they need to take time off, they can take time off. Nobody will be frowned upon if this will be requested. So yeah, it's still tough, like in any work environment, to ask for time off. You guys know how it is, of course, and no matter what, even beyond the gaming industry, work crunch is definitely a thing, and it's so unfortunate. But this is what the article goes on to say. It says, of course, anyone who's worked anywhere knows that a request from the boss doesn't need to be mandatory for it to be something you have to do. When probed, Iwinski wouldn't promise to limit crunch to certain periods or offer specific numbers, other than to say that he hoped making this public statement would help CD Projekt RED employees feel more comfortable telling their managers when they don't want to put in extra hours. I think this is the commitment we're ready to make today, and we'll be listening to people. We definitely open a lot of lines of dialogue here, and we like to start with that. So yeah, it's kind of difficult when your boss asks you to work extra hours, but says, you might not have to, it's up to you. Well, of course you're going to want to impress your boss and work those extra hours. And that's the tough thing right there, to even be asked. So, of course, crunch time is going to be happening, like he did say, around these big trailers that have to be polished, or gameplay demonstrations like the one you're seeing here that absolutely have to look 100% perfect. And I do think if you're super passionate about the project, you're going to want to put in the extra work and be proud of what you present, within reason, of course. But this is where the article definitely validated what I felt at the very beginning when reading through the first two paragraphs. It goes on to say this: perhaps they also wanted to preempt a potential story. After the publication of our Anthem investigation last month, which documented a turbulent development marked by mismanagement, crunch, and anxiety. 4 former CD Projekt RED employees reached out to tell me that they had seen similar problems in Warsaw. I felt that there are hundreds of parallels that could be drawn between the story of the rocky development of Anthem and the story of the rocky and even more rocky to become development of Cyberpunk 2077, said one former CDPR employee in an email. At times, I felt I could just replace the studio name and the game title, and it would all look so similar, almost identical. So that does not bode well for what perhaps is going on over with CD Projekt RED and the development crunch. And, the game looks absolutely beautiful. It's obviously obvious that they are working very hard. But even with Anthem, the crunch was, I guess, just too much and too overwhelming. Developers taking way too much time from their families, their loved ones, and friends, from their personal time to put their heart and soul into Anthem. And you have to also remember that previous statements with Cyberpunk 2077 have indicated that this game has seen some sort of change. So I'm curious to see if that's going to end up being some sort of good thing or bad thing, especially when it comes related to the story most recently published here about CD Projekt RED. So we have to wait and see what in the world they are talking about related to this change when it comes to Cyberpunk 2077. But this initial demonstration presentation shows that it's absolutely beautiful. And some of the, it looks like some of the devs that are working on the game are indicating that it's going to be even more difficult to work on this game going forward. We'll see what happens, so stay tuned for more info on that. But the article goes on to say the following: although CD Projekt RED first announced Cyberpunk 2077, in 2013, development of the game didn't really start until 2015, after the launch of The Witcher 3. Then followed a difficult period of pre-production, including at least one major directional shift, and the studio made the very common mistake of moving their entire development team to Cyberpunk before the project could support that many people. Add major technological overhauls and you've got a recipe for disaster. It's always the same story across the entire industry, said Bodowiski. I think that's the other founder on CD Projekt RED. He says, if you're changing the technology and at the same time you're producing the game, it's a nightmare for most of the companies. We heard a very similar story with Anthem, and it's incredible you're hearing this happening. It seems like it's happening with Cyberpunk 2077. As you guys know, Bioware transitioned from their previous engine onto Frostbite, had problems with that, had supposedly problems working with that engine. It was difficult communicating with DICE, who of course are the original founders and creators of that engine. So yeah, that is definitely a big red flag and concern, of course. But who knows? Cyberpunk 2077 could turn out brilliant. Now, previous statements, of course, from CD Projekt RED have indicated they want this game to be heavily polished when it is launched. And that seems like it's going to require a lot of crunch. They want it to match what Red Dead Redemption 2 offered when it initially launched. So that's what they're looking for in terms of quality. Next up, it says this: it led to a difficult period for the company, one marked by turnover and unclear direction. The transition from The Witcher 3 to Cyberpunk initially was the hardest part, because a lot of these things have to be defined. We have a demo which is sort of crystallizing the vision to prove that it's there. So again, I'm having total flashbacks to Anthem, of course, to the time when they released their big E3 demo. You guys may remember that. A lot of people complained about the downgrade related to that demonstration. And the Kotaku article that investigated Bioware even said, they really just finalized the direction for the game at that point. We're still trying to figure out what is going on. So interesting to see the parallels there for sure. Now, this is what it says. So from a wider perspective, we need to remember that the whole production takes, say, 4 years, sometimes 5 years, and most of the time, like 3 years, there's no crunch, said Badowski. There's no additional hours. Sometimes before E3 we crunch, but most of the time the production is super normal. We are talking about the very last round towards the release, and it's always difficult to manage, but you know that there are some complications. It's really difficult not to use all the forces at the very end. Plus, there's another factor. Sometimes we have unique specialties very unique people, and you cannot clone them. We need them to work on highly specific things. And we need to ask them to spend more time on something highly specific because there's no other way to do it. It's mostly research and development or very special requests like tools. So that's definitely an interesting take on it. And even like Rockstar, they kind of bragged in a way that they were working over like 100-hour work weeks. And that was just for like the big execs. But I think if they lead, they expect everyone else to follow. That's my opinion on that. They expect you to work very hard, sometimes too hard, it seems, at some of these development studios. Now, finally, it says this: when pressed, the one specific promise they'd make was that Cyberpunk 2077's final hours will be less crunchy than the last games. I think we can promise that'll be better than The Witcher's finishing period, Bowowski said. So there's that. It looks like they're trying their best over at CD Projekt RED to improve that internally. And again, I personally think that this whole story is CD Projekt RED trying to get ahead of Kotaku's investigation. It looked like apparently Jason Schreier was very much investigating, probably investigating several development studios. He's very much about lessening the hours and more humane treatment of developers. We get amazing video games from a lot of this, but sometimes I think it's too much of a crunch, of course. So hopefully they can figure things out over at CD Projekt RED before, they have even more problems with turnover and stuff like that going forward. But guys, stay tuned here to Open World Games. I'll let you guys know what is going on with CD Projekt RED, Cyberpunk 2077, and more open world gaming goodness. But guys, thank you for watching. Stay tuned for more, and I will see you guys next time. Take care.